Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into one of the most iconic battles in American history,
Mm.
the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Yeah.
You might know it as Custer's Last Stand,
Right.
but we're going to go a little bit beyond that simple narrative.
Yeah.
We're going to explore the events leading up to the battle,
Right.
the key players on both sides,
Hmm.
and the lasting impact it had on the indigenous people
Yeah.
involved. We've got some fascinating sources for this deep dive, including excerpts from the History podcast,
Oh, cool.
History That Doesn't Suck.
Yeah. What's really striking about these sources is how they bring to life the human element of this historical event.
Yeah.
They paint a picture of the Lakota and Cheyenne and Arapaho people just
Right.
living peacefully, in the sprawling village before the eruption of the conflict.
Yeah, one source describes a scene of over 1,000 teepees stretching across the prairie with children playing in the Little Bighorn River and families going about their day.
Yeah.
It really sets the stage for the dramatic turn of events
Yeah.
that was about to unfold.
Yeah. It's important to understand the context leading up to this battle.
Right.
The stage was set years earlier with the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868.
Okay.
This treaty was intended to establish peace and create the Great Sioux Reservation, which
Yeah.
included the Sacred Black Hills.
Mhm.
And it also aimed to shut down the Bozeman Trail,
Okay.
a route that was causing tension between the U.S. Army and the Lakota.
So a treaty was signed.
Yeah,
You'd think things would settle down,
right.
but it wasn't that simple, was it?
No, not at all. The treaty was the result of Red Cloud's War, a successful campaign
Mhm.
led by the Lakota leader Red Cloud against the U.S. Army.
Okay.
However, even with the treaty in place, there were dissenting voices.
Yeah.
Notable Lakota leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse refused to sign.
Right.
They distrusted the U.S. government's intentions.
And their distrust, as history shows, was sadly justified.
Absolutely, the discovery of gold in the Black Hills
Oh, yeah.
ignited a gold rush, shattering the fragile peace established by the treaty.
Right.
Imagine being promised this land, a place sacred to your people, only to see it overrun by prospectors seeking their fortune.
It's a classic tale of broken promises,
Yeah,
a recurring theme in the history of westward expansion.
right.
So how did the government respond to this escalating situation?
Well, President Grant found himself caught between appeasing white settlers eager for land and gold
Mm-hmm.
and trying to maintain some semblance of peace with the indigenous population.
Yeah.
His attempts to buy the Black Hills failed,
Hmm.
as the Lakota considered them sacred, not something to be bought or sold.
Right.
So the tension just continued to escalate.
Right.
By 1876, the government had labeled the Lakota, who hadn't relocated to the reservation, as hostile,
Hmm.
and the Great Sioux War began.
Right.
The Army had a strategy in place, a three-pronged pincer movement,
Okay.
to force these Lakota onto the reservation.
Okay. So you had this military strategy
Hmm.
designed to divide and conquer. It actually had the opposite effect.
That's fascinating.
The Battle of Powder River, which took place in March of 1876, ended up pushing various indigenous groups together, strengthening their resolve to fight for their land and way of life.
It's like it backfired on them.
Yeah,
Instead of weakening the resistance, it united them.
right. This is where two iconic figures come into the picture,
Okay.
Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell us a little about their roles in this conflict?
Sure. Sitting Bull was a spiritual and political leader,
Okay.
known for his unwavering pursuit of freedom for his people.
Hmm.
And Crazy Horse, on the other hand, was a brilliant military strategist,
Uh-huh.
renowned and feared for his prowess on the battlefield.
A powerful duo.
Yes.
They rallied the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho,
Right.
uniting them against a common enemy.
Exactly. The non-treaty village, a gathering of those who refused to be confined to the reservation,
Right.
swelled in size by the time of the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Yeah.
They had amassed a force of over 2,000 warriors. They were prepared to defend their way of life.
Let's move on to that fateful day, June 25th, 1876.
Okay.
The day of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, as we heard earlier, life in the village was peaceful that morning.
Yeah.
But everything changed with the arrival of the 7th Cavalry, led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer.
Custer, a Civil War hero, was known for his bravery and his inclination to take risks. But at the Little Bighorn, his decisions would have devastating consequences.
Yeah.
He divided his forces not once, but twice, disregarding warnings from his scouts about the size and strength of the indigenous forces.
It seems like a case of overconfidence,
Yeah.
perhaps fueled by his previous victories.
Right.
But Custer's past also included brutal attacks on indigenous villages, such as the Washita Massacre in 1868.
That's an important point to remember.
Yeah.
It helps us understand the Lakota and Cheyenne perspective.
Right.
They were facing a man with a history of violence against their people, a man who represented a very real threat to their existence.
So Custer sends Major Reno with part of the 7th Cavalry to attack the village.
Mm-hmm.
But Reno's attack is quickly repelled. His men suffer heavy losses and are forced to retreat across the Little Bighorn River.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Custer, with the remaining soldiers under his direct command,
Right.
finds himself facing a much larger force of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors.
The difference in numbers is staggering.
Yeah.
Custer's 5 companies were vastly outnumbered. It's almost as if he believed his reputation and military prowess would be enough to secure victory despite the odds.
Perhaps it was overconfidence or a miscalculation of the Lakota and Cheyenne fighting spirit,
Yeah.
but the outcome was devastating. Custer and all the men under his direct command were killed in the battle.
Wow.
The Battle of the Little Bighorn, forever known as Custer's Last Stand, became a symbol of both Native American resistance and the tragic consequences of underestimating one's enemy.
Yeah. It's crucial to note that while Custer and his 5 companies perished, the rest of the 7th Cavalry, under the command of Benteen and Reno, managed to hold their position.
All right, they were eventually reinforced, and that prevented a complete disaster for the U.S. Army.
Yes. But for the Lakota and Cheyenne, this victory was a resounding affirmation of their strength and determination.
A moment of triumph. But as you alluded to earlier, it came at a high price.
Indeed, the aftermath of the battle had far-reaching and devastating consequences, especially for the indigenous peoples involved.
It almost feels like a turning point, where a victory on the battlefield leads to a different kind of loss in the bigger picture.
Precisely. While the Lakota and Cheyenne celebrated their victory at Little Bighorn, it triggered a wave of retaliation from the U.S. government and military.
How so? Did this single battle really change the course of events that drastically?
It did. Custer in death was transformed into a national martyr. The defeat at Little Bighorn fueled anti-indigenous sentiment across the nation.
So a defeat for the U.S. Army becomes a rallying cry against the very people who defeated them.
Tragically, yes. Custer's defeat was woven into a narrative that justified increased military campaigns against the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. It was used to bolster public support for the very policies that were already displacing and disenfranchising these communities.
What happened to the Lakota and Cheyenne after the battle? Were they able to hold on to their land and way of life?
Sadly, no. They faced relentless pressure from the U.S. Army. Many were forced to flee to Canada, seeking refuge from a government determined to confine them to reservations.
And for those who remained, what was life like on the reservations?
It was a harsh existence. They were stripped of their traditional lands and ways of life. Their freedom, severely restricted resources were scarce, and they were subjected to policies aimed at assimilating them into white American culture.
A forced assimilation erasing their cultural identity. And what became of Crazy Horse the warrior, who played such a pivotal role in the victory at Little Bighorn?
Crazy Horse met a tragic end just a year after the battle. Seeking peace for his people, he surrendered to the U.S. Army along with his followers. However, there was a misunderstanding during a meeting at Fort Robinson.
A misunderstanding. What happened?
Crazy Horse, fearing imprisonment, attempted to leave. During the ensuing struggle, he was bayoneted by a soldier and died that night. His death under such controversial circumstances marked a symbolic end to Lakota independence.
A leader who fought so valiantly for his people's freedom, only to meet such a tragic end. It's heartbreaking. And the Cheyenne, what became of them after the battle?
Their story is equally filled with hardship and injustice. The Cheyenne were forced to relocate to Oklahoma, a land far from their homelands. This forced relocation, part of a larger pattern of displacement, led to suffering and death.
And this relocation culminated in what's known as the Fort Robinson Massacre, correct?
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Yes. The Fort Robinson Massacre of 1879 is a chilling example of the brutality inflicted upon the Cheyenne. After being forced onto a reservation in Oklahoma, a group led by Dull Knife and Little Wolf decided to escape and return to their homelands.
A desperate attempt to reclaim their freedom and return to a place where they could live according to their traditions.
Exactly. Their journey was fraught with danger and hardship. They lived as fugitives, constantly on the move. Some eventually surrendered and were taken to Fort Robinson with the promise of being sent back to Oklahoma.
But they didn't want to go back, did they?
No, they had endured so much already, and being forced back to a place where they had suffered so much was unbearable. They refused to leave Fort Robinson.
And how did the Army respond to their refusal?
The army, in an attempt to coerce them into compliance, withheld food, water, and fuel, subjecting them to inhumane conditions.
A cruel and calculated tactic to break their spirit.
It was driven to desperation by hunger and cold. The Cheyenne made another attempt to escape. Tragically, soldiers killed 64 of them during the escape attempt, and most of the rest were recaptured.
Another senseless loss of life. The Fort Robinson Massacre stands as a stark reminder of the dark legacy of Little Bighorn, the enduring consequences for the indigenous peoples who dared to resist.
It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about this period of American history, a period marked by broken treaties, forced displacement, and cultural annihilation. The Battle of Little Bighorn and its aftermath were not just about a single military engagement. They were about the clash of cultures, the collision of two vastly different ways of life.
On one hand, you have the Lakota Cheyenne and Arapaho fighting to protect their homelands, their way of life, their very existence. And on the other, you have the U.S. government and military driven by westward expansion, the pursuit of resources, and a belief in manifest destiny, a belief that they had the right to claim this land.
That's a crucial point. This belief in manifest destiny blinded many to the injustices being perpetrated against the indigenous population. It allowed them to justify actions that were, in essence, land theft and cultural genocide.
The legacy of the Battle of Little Bighorn is complex and multifaceted. For the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, it's a story of resistance, of courage, in the face of overwhelming odds.
And also a story of profound loss. The loss of land, the loss of culture, the loss of life, a loss that continues to reverberate through generations.
And for the U.S., it's a reminder of a dark chapter in its history, a time when the drive for expansion came at a terrible human cost, a cost that we are still grappling with today.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder that the consequences of historical actions can echo through time, shaping the present in ways we might not always realize.
Exactly. The echoes of the Battle of Little Bighorn are still felt today. It compels us to look beyond the simplified narratives, to grapple with the complexities of the past, and to acknowledge the lasting impact of historical injustices.
We often think of history as something, separate from our lives, confined to textbooks and museums. But this deep dive into the Battle of Little Bighorn shows us that history is alive.
It shapes who we are and how we understand the world around us.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to remember that history is often written from the perspective of the victors. It takes effort to uncover the voices and perspectives of those who were silenced, those who suffered the consequences of actions taken by those in power.
This deep dive has certainly been an eye-opening experience, shedding light on a pivotal moment in American history and revealing the human stories often overshadowed by the dominant narrative.
We've only just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to explore the lives of individuals like Sitting Bull Crazy Horse Red Cloud and countless others, both indigenous and non-indigenous, who were caught up in this tumultuous period.
Their stories offer a deeper understanding of the motivations, the struggles, and the triumphs of those who lived through these times. It's a reminder that history is not just about dates and battles, but about real people, their hopes, their dreams, their fears.
Precisely. And by delving into these individual stories, we gain a richer, more nuanced understanding of the past. We see the human faces behind the historical events, and we begin to grasp the complexities of a period shaped by conflicting ideologies and ambitions.
You've given us a lot to think about, a lot to reflect on. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the Battle of Little Bighorn serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of broken promises and the dangers of unchecked ambition. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about our past and to strive for a future where the mistakes of history are not repeated.
Well said. And to our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring this fascinating and complex period of history. Dig deeper into the lives of the individuals we've discussed. Seek out different perspectives and challenge the assumptions you might hold. The journey of learning and understanding never truly ends if you enjoyed this deep dive. Be sure to subscribe to our show for more explorations of fascinating stories and hidden truths from history. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.